Picture a door you were never meant to find. Not a creaky basement door, a blast door, painted government gray, bolted into living rock with a wheel the size of a steering column. Behind it, the air is recycled, the lights never go out, and the floor is always clean. Because in the Cold War, the end of the world had a maintenance schedule. We know some of these places existed. We can point to them on a map. But there's another story, whispered, denied, and repeated for decades. A story that says the deepest bunkers were only the beginning. Before we go down the hatch, lock in with me. This is Tom McKenzie, and you are listening to Unexplained History. If you are enjoying this show, make sure to subscribe on all major platforms like Apple, Spotify, and Spreaker. And if you want more unexplained content, swing by our website at unexplained.co. Now, listen closely. The silence underground isn't empty. It's crowded with secrets. The Cold War had a sound. It was the click of a coded phone line, the distant churn of an air handler, the steady, indifferent beep of a dosimeter in a hallway where nobody smiled. Nations built hardened shelters you can actually visit today. Facilities carved into mountains, buried under farms, disguised beneath office buildings. Their purpose was brutally simple: survive the first strike and keep command alive long enough to answer. Concrete feet thick, shock-mounted rooms, water tanks, diesel. A world designed to outlast fire, if only for a little while. But the mystery isn't that bunkers exist. The mystery is the claim that what we've been shown is only the surface layer. Over the years, a darker rumor line has formed. Tales of ultra-deep military bases, drilled far below what the public knows, linked by tunnels, trains, and sealed elevators that drop for minutes. Not one hidden facility, but a network, global, redundant, built to keep running if cities went dark. Some accounts describe doors inside doors, checkpoints without insignia, and entire sections that were off-limits, even to cleared personnel. The phrase changes by decade, but the idea stays the same: a secret underworld beneath the official one. And then, the stories get stranger. People talk about low-frequency hums that make your teeth ache, about hallways that feel wrong, like your skin is being measured, about missing time on shift logs, equipment that wasn't on any inventory, and warning signs with symbols no one could explain. There are claims of experiments, of psychological screening so intense it felt like interrogation, of sealed rooms that required 2 keys and a 3rd authorization spoken into a handset by a voice you never met. And in the most extreme versions, the rumor spills into the paranormal, unidentified craft, non-human presences, and encounters that sound like science fiction, told in the same flat tone as someone describing a fire drill. Here's what makes it stick. The Cold War produced real secrecy on an industrial scale, compartmentalization so strict that 2 people could work the same facility and never learn what the other was doing. It produced real engineering that feels impossible until you see it. Cities of steel and cable hidden in rock, built fast, funded quietly, and designed to deny the obvious question: how could anyone build that without us knowing? And it produced real fear of decapitation strikes, of sudden flashes, of a siren that meant you had minutes. In that fear, the line between documented bunkers and imagined empires underground can blur, which is exactly why the rumor survives. It sits right on top of a foundation that is undeniably real. So that's our question as we step into this episode. We can verify hardened Cold War facilities, built to keep leaders alive and radios transmitting while the world burned. But beyond the known doors, people insist there are deeper ones, and that some of what happened down there wasn't just classified. It was unnatural. Next, we're going to travel back to the era that made this possible. The budgets, the paranoia, the race to burrow into the earth. Because to understand the secret world below, we have to start with the moment the world above began to feel temporary. Before we can understand why governments started digging into mountains and pouring oceans of concrete, we have to go back to the moment the future felt like it could end in a single flash. Not in some far-off battlefield. Right above the Capitol dome. The 1950s and 60s weren't just a rivalry. They were a daily, physical sensation. Anxiety you could taste in the air. This is the world before our timeline's first shockwave. Washington, D.C. looks polished in photographs. White stone, clean columns, measured confidence. But listen closely to the era, and you hear something else. Typewriters rattling like rain on a tin roof. Telephones ringing with a hard, metallic insistence. Elevator doors snapping shut. After the Soviet Union detonated an atomic bomb in 1949, the city's posture changed. There was a new assumption under every conversation. The enemy could reach you, and the weapon would not be a fleet. It would be light. Then came the thermonuclear leap, hydrogen bombs in the early 1950s, an escalation so enormous it scrambled the human imagination. The language had to stretch. Megaton, overpressure, fallout pattern. Civil defense posters told families to duck and cover, while basement shelves filled with canned goods and water drums. Yet the fear wasn't only the blast. It was the waiting. The idea that at any ordinary hour, during a school bell, a committee hearing, a commute, sirens might rise and the world would narrow to minutes. Inside the Pentagon and across the river in offices with frosted glass, secrecy became a kind of weather. Men carried folders stamped with classifications that weren't meant for daylight. Conversations stopped when a door opened. Ashtrays overflowed. Coffee went cold. The Cold War was a contest of nerves, but it was also engineering. Procedures, redundancies, chain of command diagrams that tried to make catastrophe manageable. If the unthinkable happened, who would speak for the country? And where would they be standing when they did? In command centers, the air smelled of ozone from electronics and the sharp bite of copier ink. Maps were pinned like surgical charts. Arcs, rings, radii, each line translating a bomb into geometry. Early warning systems stretched outward. Radar networks, distant listening posts, the distant early warning line in the Arctic, and later the hardened logic of NORAD. When you picture it, don't picture heroism. Picture routine. a watch officer staring at a clock, the low hum of fluorescent lights, the knowledge that a mistake could be the last mistake. And above that routine, the technological race kept tightening the vise. In 1957, Sputnik crossed the sky. Just a beat of motion, a faint radio pulse, but it landed like a psychological bomb. If they could put a satellite over your head, they could imagine an intercontinental missile following the same path. The response was more than rockets and research budgets. It was an obsession with continuity. Plans, alternate locations, hard lines, guarded routes. The government began to think in layers, surface and subsurface, public and classified, visible institutions, and the hidden machinery meant to outlive an impact. So the ground around Washington started to change. Quietly. Not just shelters for families, but fortified sites for the state itself. Places like Mount Weather in Virginia, Raven Rock in Pennsylvania, and other facilities whose names were never meant to be said out loud. Construction sounded different when it was secret. Distant jackhammers swallowed by forest. Dump trucks rolling before dawn. Concrete poured behind fences without signage. Underground, the world turned to steel doors, air filtration hiss, thick cables as heavy as a man's arm, and corridors that felt too straight, too prepared, like a building practicing for the end of everything. That's the atmosphere. An era where the unthinkable was scheduled into drills, where technology made distance meaningless, and where survival started to look like an architectural problem. Above ground, Washington kept smiling for the cameras. Below ground, it rehearsed for catastrophe in concrete and code words. And in our next segment, we hit the first major moment in the timeline, the event that turns these preparations from theory into urgent, immediate necessity. There's a moment in every long mystery when the story stops being theory and starts being concrete. Not rumor, not folklore. Concrete you can pour. Steel you can bolt. Rock you can drill. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, while the public watched the sky for missiles, the US government was busy carving out places to survive them. This is where the incident begins. Not with a siren, with a tunnel. Start at Mount Weather in Virginia's Blue Ridge. From the road, it's woods, ridgelines, and ordinary rural quiet. But the work happening there had a different sound. Diesel engines at odd hours, compressors thumping like distant artillery, and the steady bite of drills turning mountain stone into dust. By 1959, construction on what was known as Area B was completing. That date matters because it tells us the facility wasn't a fantasy drafted in a panic. It was planned, funded, staffed, and finished on a schedule, and then quietly folded into a larger continuity mission. Picture the early milestones, the kind that never make headlines. Survey crews marking alignments where a portal could hide in plain sight. Blasting teams setting charges, timing them to minimize surface attention. Short windows, controlled vibration, clean spoil removal. Truck after truck carrying away broken rock like it was just another road project. Inside, engineers chase two enemies at once: time and physics. Rock wants to shift, water wants to seep, air wants to go stale. So the mountain gets lined, sealed, compartmentalized. Doors that can take pressure, corridors that can be isolated, ventilation that can scrub and recirculate when the outside world becomes unusable. And then there are the people, not just the miners and the concrete crews, but administrators, communication specialists, logistics planners, the ones who think in lists and redundancies, who ask how many beds, how many radios, how many hours of generator fuel? Because continuity isn't a bunker. Continuity is a system. Security protocols tightened as capability rose. Access controlled, routes restricted, information chopped into small pieces so no single worker could see the whole blueprint in their head. The most important rooms aren't the biggest ones. Often they're the ones with the quietest doors, where a single badge swipe changes everything. Now shift north to Pennsylvania, to a place with a name that sounds almost theatrical: Raven Rock. Around it, the landscape looks solid and patient, the kind of terrain people trust without thinking. That trust was engineered into policy. In 1962, Raven Rock was designated and hardened, reinforced, upgraded, prepared to take punishment and keep functioning. Hardening is a sterile word for a brutal concept. Assume the unthinkable happens, and design so the people inside can still speak, still breathe, still issue orders when everything above is breaking. Hardening means thickening structures, reinforcing entrances, controlling shock paths, and building layers of failure so one hit doesn't become a cascade. It means power that can stand alone, generators tested, fuel stored, maintenance scheduled like a ritual. It means water you can trust, sanitation that won't collapse into disease, and comms lines routed and rerouted so a single cut won't silence the facility. And it means drills, procedures written down, practiced, revised. The kind of repetition that turns human beings into reliable components of a machine, even when their hands shake. So by the time the Cold War anxiety reached its sharpest edge, these weren't just holes in the ground. Mount Weather's Area B had moved from construction noise to operational routine. Raven Rock had been hardened into something meant to endure. And that's the key detail. Capability ramps up quietly, step by step, until one day the question isn't, could this exist? It's, what exactly did they build it to do? In the next segment, we follow what happens when these facilities stop being preparations and start becoming active responses. There's a moment in every mystery when the facts stop feeling like facts and start feeling like a doorway. After the initial incident, the paper trail doesn't disappear. It multiplies. Acronyms, budget lines that don't quite add up, facilities that are acknowledged but never fully described. And in that gap between what is said and what is meant, something else grows. Rumor, speculation, high strangeness. Continuity of government plans were not myth. They were policy, drafted in the cold light of nuclear math. The idea was brutally simple. If Washington vanished in a flash, someone, somewhere, would still be able to speak for the United States. That meant hardened communications, protected leadership sites, underground operations. Names surfaced in plain language: Mount Weather, Raven Rock, places that sounded like hiking trails until you imagined them sealed behind concrete and steel. The public saw fragments. The rest stayed classified. And secrecy has a sound. It's the click of a redacted page. By the mid-1960s, Cheyenne Mountain became the symbol people could point to. Not a fairy tale, an engineered cavern carved for survival. In 1964, new systems came online, glowing panels and phone lines that promised a voice after the blast. In 1965, testing accelerated. Doors designed to endure shock, crews practicing like tomorrow had already ended. It was real, documented, photographed, and that's what made it dangerous for the imagination. If one mountain could be hollowed out, how many others were quietly listening? Then came the other ingredient: money that couldn't be followed. Classified budgets, compartmentalized contracts, a language of need to know that turned normal oversight into a guessing game. In 1975, Senate oversight hearings widened the crack, lawmakers pressing intelligence agencies about secrecy, undisclosed activities, and who was watching the watchers. The hearings didn't reveal deep caverns and hidden railways, but they confirmed something unsettling. Vast machinery could exist in the dark, protected by rules the public never sees. And once that's admitted, the mind starts drawing maps. That's when the whispers arrive. Some earnest, some opportunistic, all hard to disprove. A former contractor hints at elevator shafts that go farther than they should. An anonymous letter claims there are bases not just underground, but ultra-deep, miles below, connected by tunnels, moving people and equipment like a second country beneath the first. Leaks appear as smudged photocopies, as late-night phone calls, as a friend of a friend who saw the badge. Official facts and extraordinary claims braid together, and the braid tightens until you can't tell which strand began as truth. Here's what makes this era feel so chaotic. Continuity of government was real enough to touch. Cheyenne Mountain had timelines, milestones, and hardware. Senate hearings proved that secrecy wasn't a side effect, it was a feature. And in that environment, every locked door becomes a stage for speculation. The question isn't only what was built, but who knew, who approved it, and who benefited from keeping it undefined. Next, we follow the people, key figures who shaped the story, and the shadows that followed them underground. Every mystery has a geography, and then it has a cast. Not just places on a map, but people who decide what gets said, what gets filed away, and what gets laughed out of the room. In the story of rumored underground bases and the machinery of secrecy, a handful of names keep surfacing like buoys in dark water. A self-styled whistleblower with scars and a microphone. An Air Force general linked to oversight. A writer who treats wild claims like evidence to be weighed. And looming over it all, the administrators of a mountain built to survive the unthinkable. These are the players. Phil Schneider enters the narrative like a flare in a cave. He presented himself as a government contractor, an engineer who'd been close enough to the hidden world to smell the welding smoke. In talks, he would hold up his hands, point to injuries, and let the silence do half the work. His central claim was explosive, a violent encounter during the construction of a deep underground facility, a battle that wasn't supposed to exist. To supporters, Schneider sounded like a man haunted by what he'd seen, a witness trying to outrun the official story. To critics, he sounded like a practiced performer, stringing technical jargon into something that felt true. Either way, he gave the rumor a human face, someone you could picture under fluorescent lights, staring at a concrete wall and thinking, "This isn't in any public budget." Then there's Leslie W. Bray, an Air Force general whose presence shifts the tale from campfire to conference room. In stories like this, a general becomes a symbol, not the person you meet in a hallway, but the signature at the bottom of a page, the authority behind a red stamp. Bray is described as part of the oversight layer, someone positioned where projects become programs, and programs become need to know. Imagine the world he'd inhabit: windowless briefings, clipped language, slides with numbers that mean nothing unless you already belong. His possible motive, if you're building a narrative, is simple and chilling: continuity. Keep the system stable, keep the chain unbroken, and keep curiosity from turning into panic. Whether Bray ever touched the specific claims is debated, but his name adds weight. It suggests that if secrets exist, they don't float, they're managed. William Poundstone stands apart because he doesn't arrive as a witness. He arrives as a reader, an investigative author who spent years sorting the mythology of covert sites from the paper trails that sometimes leak into daylight. Poundstone's reputation is built on skepticism that isn't sneering. He's the kind of mind that asks, what would this require? Who would sign for it? Where would the money hide? In the ecosystem of secret-based stories, that matters. He gives listeners permission to feel the thrill, and then to check the math. And when he points out patterns, how rumors borrow from each other, how a single insider claim metastasizes across decades, he doesn't just debunk, he explains why the story survives. For believers, he's frustrating. For everyone else, he's a compass, a reminder that mystery isn't proof, and that disbelief still leaves room for unanswered questions. And then there are the administrators, NORAD, and the people who keep Cheyenne, mountain humming. Not the generals on magazine covers, but the managers of access lists, the guardians of procedures, the ones who know which doors never open for visitors. Picture the place as it's often imagined, a mountain that feels engineered rather than carved, air that tastes faintly metallic, fluorescent corridors that swallow footsteps. Their motive isn't dramatic, it's institutional. Protect the mission, protect the perimeter, protect the public from what they aren't meant to interpret. But in a story about hidden bases, routine becomes fuel. A carefully worded denial, a tour that shows only what's approved, a shrug that says, no comment, and the mind fills in the rest. Secrecy, even when justified, creates its own shadow. And in that shadow, every unexplained detail looks like a doorway.
So when people ask how these stories spread, it's not just about tunnels or technology. It's about Schneider giving the rumor a voice and a body. It's about names like Bray implying a chain of command above the fog. It's about Poundstone testing the claims without killing the question. And it's about NORAD's mountain, silent, orderly, and real, making the impossible feel one step closer to plausible. Next, we move from personalities to process. Because once enough people repeat a claim, the pressure builds for something official. A report, a statement, an investigation. And that's where this gets even stranger. When a place is built to survive the end of the world, it also gets built to survive questions. And that's the strange tension at the center of this story. The more official the mission, the less official the public record can feel. In this segment, we're not chasing rumors. We're following paper, hearings, budget lines, agency memos, and carefully worded statements that admit just enough to stay truthful and reveal almost nothing else. This is the official report. Begin with the most reliable kind of atmosphere, fluorescent light and a stenographer's keys. In 1975, a U.S. Senate subcommittee held hearings that pulled continuity of government planning into public view, if only for a moment. The record shows senators pressing witnesses about what exactly the executive branch had built for emergency relocation and who in Congress had been told. The answers were procedural, constrained, and unmistakably cautious. The point wasn't to describe a bunker. The point was to describe authority without mapping it. Mount Weather in Northern Virginia appears in that wider continuity framework as a real facility tied to real agencies. Its existence was not the secret. The details were. When officials spoke, they leaned on categories: communications, emergency operations, relocation, preparedness. That vocabulary matters because it's how secrecy survives in plain sight. A complex can be hidden, not by denying it, but by distributing it across administrative language, spread through multiple offices, contracts, and line items that sound like office furniture. What can be stated from documented descriptions is straightforward. Mount Weather is not a single doorway in the woods. It's a campus with controlled access, fencing, and security that behaves like a federal installation. The built environment is both above and below ground, with hardened space intended to remain functional during a national emergency. That implies the basics: independent power, protected communications, storage, water, and space for personnel to operate for extended periods. Not mythic features, just engineering, the kind that shows up as contracts, maintenance schedules, and procurement. The 1975 hearings didn't expose everything. If anything, they demonstrated how limited congressional visibility could be. Senators asked who had been briefed, what legal standards governed emergency succession and relocation, and whether policies had quietly expanded beyond what the public would recognize as civil defense. The friction in the transcript is palpable. Questions that want names and diagrams, answers that return to process and jurisdiction, Oversight in practice looked like a small circle of awareness, with much of the operational detail treated as need to know. After the 1970s, the paper trail becomes more managerial, less dramatic. Federal emergency planning migrated through reorganizations, and later, FEMA would inherit major continuity responsibilities, including facilities associated with national-level emergency operations. That bureaucratic evolution matters because it explains the silence. Secrecy isn't always a locked vault. Sometimes it's a filing system where the right document exists, in the wrong office, under the wrong code, for the wrong decade. Budgets can be real without being readable, aggregated, compartmented, and justified as routine preparedness. So, the official report doesn't give us a cinematic reveal. It gives us something colder and, in its own way, more unsettling. Proof of a system designed to function through catastrophe, documented in language designed to avoid curiosity. The 1975 Senate record shows the outline, continuity planning, emergency relocation sites, and oversight that appears partial at best. Next, we step away from what government admits and into what skeptics argue. Alternative explanations, exaggerations, and the theories that try to fill in the spaces the paperwork leaves blank. We've walked the paper trail, the memos, the maps, the procurement lists that smell like old toner and cold coffee. Now comes the part that makes some listeners grit their teeth, the rational eye. Because if you're going to claim a hidden world under our feet, cities, trains, entire networks, you don't start with rumors. You start with what we know exists, what we can point to, photograph, audit, and what those known facilities were actually built to do. Skeptical analysts begin in a very unromantic place. Reinforced doors, ventilation charts, and continuity of government doctrine. The Cold War produced bunkers that are not myth at all. Hardened command sites, relocation centers, communications hubs. Think of the feel of them. Concrete that sweats in stale air, fluorescent lights that never quite stop humming, corridors that smell faintly of diesel and disinfectant. The argument is simple. These sites, plus redundant mobile command posts and dispersed agencies, were designed to keep a government functioning after a strike, not to hide a civilization. From that baseline, skeptics ask a cold question. What continuity needs are not met by the bunkers we already know about? A survivable leadership nucleus requires secure communications, power, water, air handling, and protected space for a limited staff. That's finite. It's measurable. And it's been done in the open record, sometimes partially classified, but not invisible. The leap to global ultra-deep networks, hundreds of miles of tunnels, maglev trains, underground shipyards, demands evidence of a different order. Massive excavation logistics, contracts, spoil disposal, heat management, maintenance crews, and budgets that cannot hide forever. Engineering is where the romantic story starts to creak. Go deeper underground, and the Earth doesn't become quiet. It becomes aggressive. Rock pressure rises, temperatures rise, water intrusion becomes relentless, and ventilation turns from nice to have into survival math. Every extra kilometer of tunnel means more power to move air, more pumping capacity, more heat to shed, more failure points to inspect. And the excavation itself creates a problem that refuses to be whispered away. Spoil. Millions of tons of broken rock have to go somewhere by truck, rail, conveyor, leaving a surface footprint that satellites, locals, and accountants notice. Then there's the evidence problem. Extraordinary claims often lean on whistleblowers whose stories can't be checked. No dates you can verify, no documents you can authenticate, no co-workers willing to go on record. Just, "I was there," floating in the dark. Skeptics don't say whistleblowers never tell the truth. They say testimony without corroboration is weak, especially when it's tangled with unverifiable NDAs, anonymous uploads, and details that shift each retelling. And strategically they ask, why build a vast subterranean empire when dispersion works? Multiple smaller sites, mobile systems, and redundancy are cheaper, harder to target, and easier to explain as standard defense planning. So the skeptical view doesn't deny secrecy. It narrows the claim to something governments actually do. Build limited, hardened facilities for command, communications, and survival. Then protect the details. When the story expands into continent-spanning tunnels and ultra-deep metropolises, the questions multiply. Where's the spoil? Where's the power? Where's the maintenance trail? Where's the cost that leaks into the real world? And without hard evidence, the narrative leans too heavily on voices you can't cross-examine. But skepticism isn't the end of the road. Next, we step into the other lane, the paranormal theories, and why some people insist the engineering objections miss the point entirely. We've just walked through the skeptical explanation, the paperwork, the politics, the very human motives. But there's another map people follow. Not one drawn on paper. One they swear is carved into bedrock, far below our feet. In this next stretch, we step into the believer's world. Stories of deep underground military bases, impossible machines, and encounters that sound like science fiction, until you remember how little we truly see beneath the surface. Imagine the descent first. A freight elevator that doesn't stop after a few floors, but keeps dropping, past where mines usually end, past the warm breath of groundwater, into a depth where the air feels engineered. In fringe accounts, these are DUMBs, deep underground military bases, stacked like an invisible city, multiple levels, sealed doors, long corridors where sound dies fast, and cameras that don't blink. Some versions describe underground rail lines, small carts, heavy blast doors, and an orientation so disorienting you can't tell north from down. The point of the legend is scale, not a bunker, but a hidden network. And then come the machines. Believers talk about tunneling technology that doesn't behave like drills we know, tools that melt, shear, or vitrify stone as they move. They describe walls left behind as smooth as poured glass, corners too clean, passages too wide, too straight, too fast to be dug by conventional crews. Some stories invoke nuclear-powered tunnel borers or plasma cutters that turn granite into a briefly liquid seam. In the darker versions, the heat is so intense it sterilizes everything, leaving rock that looks burned and polished at once. It's a persuasive detail because it's tactile. You can almost feel that glassy surface under your palm. Cold, flawless, wrong. This is where Phil Schneider's name echoes loudest. In his telling, he was involved in excavation work that intersected something already down there, something occupied. The most repeated version centers on a base near Dulce, New Mexico. A drilling operation breaks into a cavern, and the cavern isn't empty. He describes a sudden stench, chemical metallic air that tastes like ozone, and figures in the dark that don't move like people. Then, chaos, shouted commands, flashes of light, a sense of pressure in the chest, as if the air itself turned hostile. Schneider claimed injuries, claimed a firefight, claimed there were casualties. None of it has been corroborated. But the story clings because it plays like a nightmare you wake up from, still hearing the hum. To be clear, these underground war and alien encounter claims remain unverified. No documents we can independently confirm. No evidence we can hold up to the light and call settled fact. And yet, the idea persists because it offers a new kind of geography, one built on secrecy and shadow, hidden levels, hidden corridors, hidden agreements, and a hidden explanation for why some witnesses insist they saw what they saw. Whether you hear this and feel wonder or dread, it leaves the same thought hanging in the air. What if the real boundary isn't the sky above us, but the ground beneath us? Next, we'll follow how these stories spread, how they became a cultural legacy, and why they still shape the way people imagine the unknown. When the theories fade, what's left behind isn't an answer. It's a footprint, a heavy door, a missing file, a map with blank spaces where something should be. Tonight, in the aftermath, we're not chasing the original secret. We're following what the secret did to us. How Cold War bunkers became both tourist stops and talismans, and how a classified world trained whole generations to look for hidden rooms in the walls of history. Because once you know the infrastructure exists, you start to wonder what else is still humming underground. Step into one of these places today, and the atmosphere hits first. Concrete that seems to drink light, air that smells faintly metallic, like pennies and coal dust. Fans still mounted in the ceilings, silent now, but positioned as if they're waiting for the next command. In the United States, the Greenbrier Bunker, once built to shelter government leadership, has been decommissioned for decades, but it survives as a tour, a story you can walk through. Other sites never became public exhibits at all. They remain fenced, badged, and spoken about with careful language. That split, museum versus mystery, became the template for everything that followed. Across the Atlantic, former Cold War command posts and monitoring bunkers have been preserved in pockets. opened on weekends, staffed by volunteers, lit by fluorescent tubes that buzz like insects. In places like the UK, several underground facilities are now public attractions. Their narrow corridors staged with telephones, maps, and the stubborn optimism of mid-century design. And yet, the idea of the bunker isn't just historical. Countries that built broad civil defense networks, Switzerland is the famous example, still maintain shelters as part of civic planning, a reminder that preparedness can outlive the fear that created it. So the Cold War doesn't end in a textbook. It lingers as architecture. And architecture shapes imagination. Once the public learned that entire cities of corridors and dormitories could exist unseen, culture absorbed it, then amplified it. Film and television keep returning to the same visual grammar. Blast doors, red phones, humming consoles, the green glow of maps. You can feel it in the paranoia of Dr. Strangelove, the early computer dread of war games, the shadow bureaucracies of The X-Files, and the cold procedural tension in shows like The Americans. Then the idea mutates into the vaults of Fallout, the tunnels of Metro, the sealed worlds of Silo. Even when the plot is fiction, the setting feels like a leak from reality. Conspiracy communities didn't invent that feeling. They curated it. Online forums and late-night call-in shows made a new kind of folklore, where every declassified memo is a breadcrumb and every blacked-out line is a doorway. The language turns physical. Deep underground bases, black sites, tunnels connecting everything. And the logic is seductive. If governments built bunkers we eventually learned about, then surely they built bunkers we didn't learn about. Secrecy becomes a machine that manufactures belief. Not belief in one specific claim, but belief that the real story is always one level deeper, behind one more badge, one more locked gate. There's a psychological cost to that. Hidden infrastructure teaches the mind to distrust the surface of things. If a mountain can be hollowed out for command and control, if a luxury resort can contain a secret annex, then the ordinary world starts to feel like set dressing. And the hunger grows, not just for safety, but for revelation. People want the moment the wall swings open and the corridor appears, because it promises a clean explanation for messy fears. But bunkers are, by design, quiet spaces. They're waiting rooms for catastrophe. And when catastrophe doesn't arrive, the waiting doesn't stop. It just changes shape. That's the legacy. The physical places and the mental habit they leave behind. Some bunkers are now museums you can photograph. Some are repurposed into data centers, storage, private facilities. And some remain operational in ways we're not meant to understand, because the whole point is continuity, even when the public story changes. The Cold War taught us that history can have a basement. And once you suspect a basement exists, you start listening for the echo of your own footsteps, wondering what's behind the next door. When we come back, we'll take all of this, fact, rumor, and the silence between them, and try to land on what it means in the end. That's next, in The Conclusion. when the last document is filed away, when the last witness goes quiet, the mystery doesn't end. It just changes shape. Tonight, as we step back from the names, the dates, the official statements, and the late-night rumors, there's one image that refuses to fade. The Earth itself, sitting beneath our feet like a locked door. And the question is simple. What would it take for you to believe there's something down there? Something we were never meant to see. In the daylight, the world looks orderly. Fences have signs, roads have names, press conferences have podiums and microphones that crackle with certainty. The official version always arrives dressed in clean language, routine tests, secure storage, standard procedure. But at night, certainty thins out. A distant hum becomes a pattern. A restricted turnoff becomes an invitation. And that's where the fringe claims grow. Quietly, like roots. People describe elevators that descend too long to be ordinary, tunnels that don't appear on maps, doors that swallow sound when they close. The details differ, but the feeling is the same. The sense that the surface is only a cover. We've traced the conflict as far as it will go. On one side, records you can cite, budgets, contracts, carefully redacted memos. On the other, testimonies you can't quite prove, workers who won't give their last names, neighbors who swear the ground vibrated, pilots who remember lights where there should have been darkness. The facts insist on limits. The claims insist those limits are the point. Because secrecy isn't just about hiding a machine or a location. It's about managing what the public is allowed to imagine. If an agency can bury a project, then it can bury a mistake. It can bury a breakthrough. It can bury a story before it ever becomes history. And that's the haunting part. The underground is the perfect metaphor and the perfect hiding place. You can stand above it and feel nothing. Just pavement cooling after sunset. Wind pushing grit along a curb. A streetlight buzzing with tired electricity. Yet beneath you could be layers of concrete and steel, thick as denial. Air that smells of metal and recycled breath. Fluorescent light with no windows, no sky, no sense of time. In those places, truth becomes procedural. It's stamped, filed, compartmentalized. And when someone asks what's down there, the answer is often not a lie, but a silence with a budget. Maybe the simplest explanation is the right one. Maybe there's nothing beneath the earth except infrastructure, communications, storage, contingency plans that sound sinister only because they're unseen. Or maybe the fringe is circling a real shape in the dark. Experiments that blur ethical lines, technologies tested far from oversight, histories written in classified ink. The problem is, both possibilities have precedent. Governments have hidden disasters, hidden programs, hidden truths for decades, sometimes for security, sometimes for pride, sometimes for profit. So we end where every honest investigation ends, at the edge of what can be proven, listening to the unease in our own minds, not to surrender to paranoia, but to remember that curiosity is a form of vigilance. That concludes our investigation into this mystery. I'm Tom McKenzie. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. And remember to visit unexplained.co for the photos we discussed today. Until next time, keep looking for the truth.